Hello, viewers. Welcome back to another episode of our How to Beat Beth Harmon series. If you've been following along so far, you've seen that in the last four episodes I played against the Beth Harmon computer opponent on chess.com. I won those games pretty handily because those were the weaker versions. The next version is going to be 2400 strength, which is well above me. So um, I'll play it again eventually, and we will have an episode where I probably lose, but I want to do a few other things first. So in this episode, I'll tell you guys how do you become a Grandmaster in chess, and how does a chess rating system work. And I'll have another episode on my chess training routine, and then we'll see me get humiliated by the Beth Harmon bot. So, anyways, how do you become a Grandmaster? So, the titles like Grandmaster, International Master, stuff like that in chess, they all depend upon the rating system. So, I'll talk about two rating systems and two sets of titles. So, FIDE over here, that's a French acronym for the World Chess Federation. So, these titles are recognized everywhere. So to become a Grandmaster, you have to have a rating of 2500 or low, and you also have to have 3 norms. So to get a norm, you have to do really, really well in a tournament, and a tournament has to have at least 9 games, and you also have to play against a mix of opponents from several different countries. So there's a reason for that diversity rule in there. They were afraid that if you play against people all from your own country, then people might intentionally be losing against on purpose to help one of their teammates get a title. Like if the coach wants Beth Harmon to become a Grandmaster, they might tell all the other American players lose on purpose to Beth so she gets her title. And she'd get the Grandmaster title, but she wouldn't have really earned it. If you're playing as opponents from different countries, though, there's no way going to lose on purpose so that some foreigner can become a Grandmaster, so they're not as worried about people throwing games like that. By the way, all these titles here are pretty elite. Even a lowly National Master, just 2200 USCF, that's the US rating system, even that's like the top 1% of tournament players. A lot of people know how to play chess, but only a small minority are serious enough to go to tournaments. And of those serious tournament players, only 1% gets to the national master level. So grandmasters are extremely rare. So the next level below that in FIDE, the World Chess Federation, is International Master. That requires a 2400, a low rating, and you still have to get 3 norms. The norms for International Master are not quite as challenging as for Grandmaster. You still have to play 9 games in each tournament. Still got to do really well, but not quite as superbly as you have to do in order to get a Grandmaster norm. For a FIDE Master, or just FM for short, it's just the rating. You just got to get 2200 a low. And there's Candidate Master, which is 2200 a low. Now all these titles here are lifetime titles. If you get to Grandmaster and you get that 2500 rating, you're Grandmaster for life, even if your rating falls below 2500. And same for these other ones down here. If you get to 2200 once, and now you're FIDE Master, you're still a FIDE Master even if your rating falls below 2300. So that's the world system. There's also the US Chess Federation, which has its own system of titles and ratings. For the rating comparison, for a typical player in the US, their USCF rating is about 100 points higher than their low rating. So to become a senior master in the US, you have to have a 2400 USCF rating. That's probably around FIDE master strength. So 2500 USCF is about 2300 a low. So I talked about National Master. I mentioned very briefly that's 2200 USCF, about top 1% of American chess players who go to tournaments. I'm down here in this category. I'm an expert. My rating right now is 2127 USCF. So we're getting close to National Master, but we still have some ways to go. So these titles are all based on the rating system. So the next natural question would be, how do ratings work? So let's talk about that. The USDF system is very similar to a low ratings, but it's a bit more complicated. So I'll focus on the low ratings here. So in each tournament, you get a score, and it works like this. Every time you win a game, that's 1 point. Every draw is worth half a point, and losses are 0. So here's how they adjust your rating after each tournament. So you take your actual score, which is based on this, and they calculate your expected score based on your rating, your opponent's ratings. If you do better than expected, you're going to gain points. And how many points you gain is based on the K factor. So kids and new players often improve very rapidly, so their K factor is very high. So if K is like 40 out here, you can see that a small change here can give you a big increase in your rating. Now, if you get more experience, your rating tends to settle down and you're not going to improve quite so dramatically, so the K factor drops. Players who are pretty elite, like above 2400, their ability is very stable. They don't tend to improve very rapidly, so their K factor is going to be even lower. So the expected score, and we'll go into this in more depth shortly, that comes from your rating compared to your opponent's ratings. So if your opponent is like way above you, then you're probably going to lose to someone who's much better than you. So your expected score against that opponent is going to be pretty low. And as a result, if you lose to someone who's way better than you, it's not going to cost you a lot of points. On the other hand, if you're much better than your opponent, if your opponent's rating is way below your rating, you're probably going to win. So if you do end up beating them, you're not going to gain very much. So here's an example of how this works in practice. This is based on a 2019 Burlington Open that was in Iowa, back when I was living in Missouri. So I won my first 2 games and I lost the 3rd game. And I lost to a Grandmaster, by the way, so that did not cost me a whole lot. Based on my rating, my opponent's ratings, I was expected to score 1.75. So I was better than my first 2 opponents. I was higher rated than they were, so I was going to get points from those games. I was lower rated than the Grandmaster, so I was probably going to lose that game anyways, and that came out to an expected score of 1.75. So I won 2 games, so I got 2 points for each win. I got 0 for the loss, so I scored 2, expected to score 1.75. So you take that difference, 2 minus 1.75, and you multiply it by my K factor. So it turns out 20 times 0.25 is 5, so I gained 5 points from that tournament. So in order to become an econ professor, you got to learn a lot about math and stats, so I'll probably go into way more depth than most of you guys wanted to, but I'll try to restrain myself here and try to keep it to the basics, and so it'll be accessible to everybody. For the US system, it's very similar. With the US system, the K factor has a range of values, right, as 40, 20, 10. And the US system also has a bonus factor where if you do really well in a tournament, you get extra points on top of what you'd be already getting. The US system also has rating floors where you have this minimum rating you can't go below. That's designed to avoid what's called sandbagging. So if you're, say, 2200 strength, you might lose some games on purpose to get your rating below 2000. They go to some amateur tournament below 2000, you win a top prize for the best player below 2000. You had an unfair advantage there because your true strength was actually 2200. To avoid that kind of manipulation, they give people minimum ratings they can't fall below. So it's trying to avoid that intentional loss and then win a big tournament kind of stuff. Alright, I've tried to restrain myself to keep things basic, but if you want to know how the expected score formula works, then we're going to have to go into some more serious math. So, if you don't like math, it's a good time to stop the video. If you're curious, keep watching. So the expected score comes from the normal distribution. So the normal distribution comes up a lot in real life. That's why it's used so heavily in stats. So here's an example of how the expected score would be calculated. So the fifth Beth Harmon, who's probably going to squash me, has a low rating of around 2,400. My low rating is around 2,000. So my USDF is 2127, and my low is 1985. So roughly 2,000. So here you can see the normal distribution for me, centered at my rating of 2,000. Over here in blue, you have the Beth Harmon distribution, centered at her rating of 2,400. So my expected score is the probability of a draw from my distribution is bigger than a draw from her distribution. Now, that's pretty unlikely, it turns out. You can see some overlap here, but if you do the math and crunch the numbers, my expected score comes out to just 8%, 0.08. And her expected score is going to be 92%. So you can see why I'm pessimistic about my chances in the next match and why I'm trying to delay it by recording some other videos. Again, it's kind of hard to see from this graph why my expected score is that low. So let me show you another way of looking at it. So let's go run the program. Alright, so here's two normal distributions shown in the same graph. So you have one centered over here at 2,400 for Beth, and one centered at 2,000 for me. So all this area over here corresponds to the probability of Beth's expected score. So now if you rotate that graph around, you can see that this area down here, that's the probability that's my expected score. You can see that area over here is a lot smaller than the area for Beth. So that's why I'm very much the underdog in this upcoming match against a Beth Harmon bot on chess.com. So that's an overview of how the rating system works in chess and how you become a Grandmaster, what the requirements are. Hope you guys learned something from it and give you something to aspire to. And keep playing chess and stay healthy.